Yeah.
Coming out of your career at Morgan Stanley, you spent almost a decade there. You climbed your way up the ranks. Like I'm sure that you had to probably do something pretty incredible to get to executive director within 9 years. And yet you decided then to just go and build a career in Asia next. And so I want to talk about the next chapter from here, where you decided to head to Asia and you got involved with semiconductors and hardware specifically. So we talked about the Asia piece, where it's some convergence of the factors like interest in the area and also availability. But what drew you to the semiconductors piece specifically?
So just take a step back, because I covered a lot in that intro. But the Asia move that happened at Morgan Stanley. So I was at Morgan Stanley for 5 years, and then they wanted to have a coverage person doing tech in Asia, and so they picked me because I was the most willing to go, right? And I went. So, it was initially supposed to be like a 1-year gig, right? You're going to go there, you're going to get the lay of the land, develop the relationships with the analysts, come back here, we'll have somebody but when I got there, first of all, Asia was on fire at the time. Like China was like in its heyday. It was booming, right? Yeah. Every hedge fund was building an office in Hong Kong or in Singapore. Everybody was putting money into China. This was 2004, right? I just knew there was going to be a better path for me to stay. And so, they'd asked me to come back, and then they wanted me to stay and continue to work in the desk in Asia. I just feel like 1 year wasn't enough, and I wanted to stay there. So I stayed at Morgan Stanley for a number of years. There, I was there like another 4 or 5 in Asia. With Morgan Stanley. It was a natural transition. And then I became kind of an Asia guy. I was an Asia specialist. I lived in, and the thing about Asia is that in Asian tech, it's really mostly kind of tech hardware. It's really semis, and like Taiwan is all tech hardware and semis, right? And Taiwan is really the heartbeat of Asian technology, right? And so that's kind of how that evolved, and I ended up spending 15 years there. So,
yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I want to talk about the heartbeat of Asian technology in Taiwan and semiconductors and hardware, but I also want to talk about the experience of like building a career in another country, because that's something not a lot of people in finance do. A lot of them, they stay in New York or San Francisco or Chicago or LA or something like that, and they build a career there. You chose to be global about it. And so what are some of the pros and cons of building a career outside of the US and in Asia specifically while working for a US company?
Yeah, I think the pro is certainly, it gives you just a much more diverse background. Particularly if you've been successful in two continents, right? And I was able to kind of do well in both places, right? It gives you just a perspective on the world you would never have. I mean, to this day, I still see things, I think, sometimes before other people, because like I understand Japan and like I understand Taiwan and all that stuff, right? So it's just the perspective, like personally, just an incredibly enriching experience to like live overseas in a place like that, and having like a career like that. I mean, that's like a lifetime opportunity. Look, I just think like from a personal perspective, from a resume perspective, in terms of like developing, like your resume and like, your background and all that, and a personal perspective. So those are certainly the pros. The one con, and there is one, is that you can get stuck there. And this happens to a lot of guys in Asia. Like you're like an Asia guy, and like you kind of have a window if they're like 5 years where you're like, okay, if I'm going to go back, I got to go back. And then like if you're there 10 years, all of a sudden, like, some of the guys you were working with 10 years ago are retired, right? And you have all your relationships are in Asia from a sales perspective, because like a lot of the buy side guys have turned over and all that stuff. That's the tough part. The tough part is kind of coming back. And like the re-entry into the real world of, living in the United States as a regular civilian, rather than living the expat life. Is a difficult reentry, certainly, and professionally, it's hard to make your way back after like a number of years, So I'd say those would be the cons. Like, so you have to be very aware of, like, you have to have like a plan and a map when you go. Okay.
Yeah,
like,
for sure. It's
important
to like be intentional, plan that out, make sure that it's like you've got a game plan. Otherwise, like I hear you, people get stuck. But I'm curious about that personal side of things. And so you mentioned like the expat life and stuff like that. So personally, like what was the biggest like cultural adjustment going back to the US and rebuilding the career there?
I mean, the personal adjustment is just life's hard here. It's you're living in Hong Kong as an expat. It's a privileged life. Like domestic help is inexpensive. You have 3 nannies. It's $2,500 a month. And like here you have a driver. Those things are like, for the uber wealthy here. And, like you come back here and you're waiting in line at the post office like everybody else. It's just, it's a shock to the system. That was, but I always knew that was going to be the case. I was kind of ready for it. And, my wife and I were both prepared for it. We thought, but it was still hard. And I would say the one thing is we came back when our children were really young on purpose, thinking that it wouldn't be any kind of a transition for them because they were like 1 and 3, but it still was. My 3-year-old was like thrown for a loop for a year. Like, she's like, where am I? What's going on? Because like just like dealing with like people from New York versus like people like dealing like in Asian culture, it's like it's like a harsher environment. Like, she wasn't used to it, and so that was the. We knew that was going to be a challenge, and it was. It certainly didn't disappoint from that perspective.
So it's good that you were prepared for. At least you kind of knew what you were getting yourself into to make that transition.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about the global side, some of the benefits and pitfalls of building a global career like that. But let's hear about the other side of things. So the tech, and specifically, as you said, in a lot of parts of Asia, tech means hardware and semiconductors in particular. And it sounds like you had particular expertise in Taiwan, which of course is the home of TSMC and a lot of the world's semiconductor output. And so let's get a little context on semis and just like hear about this. So if you had to teach semis in 60 seconds, what's the mental model that you'd use to analyze the industry?
What's the mental model for the industry? I think that's the mental model for semis. Yeah, look, I think right now the semiconductor universe is broken up in really kind of 2 categories, and that's where I would start. You have kind of your growth vector of semiconductors, and you have your sort of cyclical vector of semiconductors. Your growth vector of semiconductors is anything really that kind of falls into the whole AI landscape, right? And most of these semiconductor companies that fall into the AI landscape are some enabler of some type of technology. Within semis, right? And could be sort of a niche component area like in networking, or it could be, something like an accelerator like NVIDIA makes that, is really sort of the engine that makes things go. And then you have sort of the cyclical side of things, which are stuff that's exposed to more of the economically sensitive parts of the food chain. Right. So things that semiconductors that go into industrials, autos, consumer electronics, things of that nature. Right. So that's really kind of how you break it down. I think it's also about and there are cyclical industries, right? Whether it's AI or whether it's the economically sensitive part of the food chain, like they are cyclical industries. That's the bottom line. There is supply, there's lead times on these products when they're manufactured. Supply gets built up, or there's insufficient supply. They make more supply orders. There's an increase in orders. And then all of a sudden there's too much capacity, and then the cycle rolls over again, right? So once you understand the semiconductor, you understand the cyclical component of semis, you can kind of understand the cyclical component of any really like supply demand driven industry, like commodities or something like that, right? So, it's understanding the cyclicality and understanding, and I would sort of break it down in those two areas in terms of understanding, things from a top down perspective. So that's how I'd kind of learn it first. And then you kind of dig into the weeds on the tech. And, at the end of the day, unless you're an engineer, like even the most savvy tech investor, institutional, like they're not really tech guys, right? They're not like, they're not building chips, right? So, to a degree, like you can get really on the weeds on the tech. But that doesn't always make you the best investor, right? It's kind of understanding product cycles. It's understanding cyclicality, things of that nature. So that's kind of how I would learn it.
It's kind of interesting because it's such an interesting niche of tech that's so incredibly foundational and important to the rest of the industry and technology. But in the US, it's kind of funny because we get so caught up in the software side of things. Like, we pay the highest multiples, the revenue multiples, the ARR multiples, the EBITDA multiples for ARR, for software businesses, for its recurring revenue, and like tangibly, like not much CapEx, not much like physical presence in the world, where in some ways it's like so much harder to build a semiconductor industry and build a company in that. And it's been fascinating to me as like a bystander to see what that looks like. I, recently read the Chip Wars book, which I'm sure you've heard plenty about, that breaks this down. I've seen sort of the difficulties of the US in terms of building a lot of these semiconductor fabs and things like that. And so it's a fascinating industry, extraordinarily important, kind of taking the limelight at the moment. But lest we forget, during this time, you not only shifted geography, you also shifted some banks, you also shifted industries, and you shifted roles at some point in here where you went to the equity research side of things. And so let's spend a second on that. Tell us about equity research. Why did you switch? What was that like?
Yeah, look, the switch for me was just kind of a natural transition, and in terms of like, wanting to develop the analytical skill set for me, right? I knew an industry really well. I knew it as good. I knew it as well as most analysts, if not better. I'd been looking at it for a long time. But I didn't know how to model. I was been in the industry a long time, didn't know how to model. And I knew that was like, so for me, even being in the business, I've been in the business, 13, 14 years, I still was trying to get better and, round out my skill set. And I thought that was a good way to do it. I think this is the interesting thing about modeling. Is it's kind of like once you do it once, you kind of know how to do it. It's hard. It's a hard thing to learn. But like once you model one company, you kind of get how the whole thing works. And what I loved about it was that like you could really, and you kind of knew when you were making a bad call on something, like, because you could see it in your assumptions. You're like, okay, I'm gonna recommend this as a buy, but I can't really see it getting better from here. If like I put this number in, there's no way they're gonna do that number there, and like, But look, I made the train. Yeah, for me, it was developing that skill set, and rounding out the skill set. Knowing eventually, I didn't think at that point I was going to get the shot to go to the buy side, but I knew I'd have a better one if that was a skill set I rounded out and developed. But I figured, look, I couldn't go wrong if I got this. I got a job as like sort of a senior analyst, covering for a lot of high profile names, without having actually really done it only because I'd been doing tech for so long, and I kind of, people kind of knew who I was. So, I knew like, if that was where I was going to end up, that'd be fine. I could do it. I could do that for a long time. But that would also put me in a better position to kind of like get where I am now. So that was the decision.
So it's fascinating how many shifts you've had and how many different skill sets you've been able to build up here. And I'm also cracking up as someone who teaches financial and modeling courses. You say, once you do it once, you know how to do it. We may have to agree to disagree there, but it's definitely something to it in the sense that like there's a replicable process. But One other thing, though, that I'm very curious about to get your perspective on in terms of equity research is whether it's a lagging indicator or a leading indicator. And let me explain what I mean. When I was an investment banker using equity research reports to analyze the sentiment on a stock, a lot of the times I noticed a suspicious trend where the stock went up, then everyone said, "Oh, buy." Then the stock went down, everyone said, "Sell." Is that a real characterization of the industry? Do you think that equity research is a leading indicator or a lagging indicator of a stock's performance?
I think equity research is a snapshot of the market in general, right? It's when everybody is one way on something, it tends to go the other way, right? Like, so everybody, that's consensus. That's groupthink. That's markets in a nutshell. Market is groupthink. And so, typically, because it's more comfortable to be recommending things that everybody likes, and it's uncomfortable to go the other way. It's so is it it depends, in aggregate, it is a coincident indicator. It just kind of tells you where everybody is and what everybody's thinking. It is not, it is neither a leading or a lagging indicator. That's what equity research recommendations are in a nutshell. Ultimately what you want to do as an investor, right, is you want to understand, like, where's the rate of change going to be? Okay. Let's just say you're looking at a stock and there's like 5 analysts who got buy, 5 who have sells. And all of a sudden, you realize that, that this is a rate of change piece of information. And like a bunch of people are going to come around to this view. And there's going to be like a bunch of people upgrading the stock. And like, so ultimately you want to be in front of that stuff, right? Or everybody's got to buy in it, but numbers are going way higher because of XYZ. Right. So it's that rate of change. But in short, to answer your question, I think it's a coincident indicator. I don't think it's leading or lagging. It's really just, it's the consensus view and it's a group thing. So it would appear that way if you're looking at it, in hindsight.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fascinating. I think that's a perfect answer where in some ways it's just like, okay, what do people think about it? And you can't read too much or too little into that because there's valuable information there, as you're saying. So. Yeah,
look, I think, it's a hard job. It's a really hard job. That's a hard job, man. Because here's the problem. The problem is that markets are quick. And even if you're making an investment decision on a 6-month basis, you're making those decisions relatively quickly as an investor. Like, I can make a decision to buy or sell a stock in 5 minutes, not necessarily that's always the case, but that happens. It's like the next day, if you hear something, you change your mind. Like, whereas an equity research house, your stuff's in print, right? So what do you got to do? You got to write another report. You got to go through the stock selection. You got to go through some compliance. You need to downgrade the stock. You got to change your model. So you're like, is this really worth it for me? Like, do I really, so it's just not as timely. It can't be. It's impossible. Like, it's just not. So that's the hang up with it, right? That's what makes it so hard. Is because it's hard to execute all those things on a very timely basis. So you have to sort of take them almost like a longer tailed approach to your recommendations.
Well, that's fascinating and very hard to do because it's so against everything that bakes into human psychology around following the crowd and avoiding risk and making sure that you're covering your butt, so to speak, in terms of what you say publicly. And there's probably also some social pressure where if you know the CEO of the company and you say, sell, that's got to hurt too and damage a relationship to some extent. So I get it. Hard job.